Alrighty. So, like Patrick was saying, my studies here this summer looked at Chinese investment in a pair of African countries as a mini case study of Chinese economic statecraft. It's kind of what we looked at this summer, analyzing one particular case of economic statecraft by the Chinese government. And I centered my research on whether or not this particular case of Chinese economic statecraft had implications for US national security. So what I found up front was that the Chinese lending practices were indifferent to US national security. They didn't seem to really target things that we had interest in. I found that these African supply chains, these countries are becoming more interdependent with the Chinese government, and a lot of these loans that China is giving out come with ties to actual property and give China access long-term to things like ports and railroads. So what spurred my research was that in 2013, as most of us know, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which is one of their projects their main global project to invest billions and hundreds of billions of dollars globally. And I looked at one particular corner of the Belt and Road Initiative in Eastern Africa. And to do this, I separated Chinese aid between official development assistance and other official flows, which is how most of the data was presented. Official development assistance looks like regular aid and concessional loans, whereas other official loans or other official flows, excuse me, are typically in the form of market rate loans or even above market rate loans to some of these countries with lower credit rating, which is why the credit rating issue is what got me interested in this. Was why is China spending so much money on these countries that other countries are afraid to lend to? So as of 2017, Kenya has received nearly $10 billion in Chinese loans, and Tanzania, the other country I looked at, it was nearly $4 billion. And the other research in this area looked at the ties between development assistance, other official flows, and UN voting, and they found that official development assistance typically follows global patterns, the patterns of other international institutions and other countries. It flows evenly to all countries that need aid, whereas the other official flows, which is somewhat predatory loans, flow towards more corrupt regimes. And then that led me to see, why is this important for the United States? And more background here, the green there is the other official development assistance, and you can see that the US and China spend similar amounts globally. However, China's portfolio is much more other official flows than the US, and you can see in the late 2000s a large boom in the amount of other official flows that China was lending. So this is, I pulled this from the RAND Association, that China's vision in Africa is made up of, they want a market for Chinese exports. They want political legitimacy, which is tied to the UN voting. This is more important. This was an underestimated piece in their lending, I found, and they wanted sufficient security and stability to continue the commercial practices, and access to natural resources, where this played not as heavily in the two countries that I looked at. So the way that I looked at one piece of the national security puzzle was, is China loaning near US military presence? So we can see those black dots are permanent military presence, and the magenta dots are semi-permanent. And then the Eastern African countries, you can see this, and sorry, the heat map represents all money flowing from China to these countries in US dollars. So lots of money is going to this region right here. Can you all see my cursor? Okay. And this is represents a rail project that you'll see in the next slide, and then some port projects in Tanzania. Ethiopia, I didn't look at as much, but the money is seemingly indifferent, even if you look here into West Africa to US military presence. It's just into large urban centers and whatnot, and seemingly indifferent. And this is this dark maroon line here is a completed project, and these are our planned projects as well. This is largely what these Chinese loans are being spent on. The loans come in the form of the recipient country here, in this case, Kenya, gets to receive a finished railroad produced entirely by Chinese exported labor. And in return, Kenya owes China the money, but Kenya never sees the money. It's kind of a closed loop loan, which is a lot of these countries are in this recent economic downturn over the late spring and early summer. These countries are trying to renegotiate these loans with China, and we're yet to see how those have really played out. But what I found was that while these are largely economic investments in these East African countries, that plays little for U.S. national security. We have weak economic ties with these countries, and therefore the growth that China's investing in doesn't really play with us. If you can look at these are the regional imports from other countries, and they're largely in buying from China, which is it helps China, but it doesn't really hurt us because it's not we know that trade isn't a zero-sum game, and so we don't really have much of a dog in the trade fight between these small African economies and China. That's all I have.
Lance, the presentation was really nicely done. Big topic. In fact, in my view, too big. So one of the things as I was looking at it, it needs even a tighter focus. If it's going to be about Kenya and Tanzania, then, kind of cutting out some of the larger implications, perhaps. That said, I love it when a future Air Force officer absolutely makes an Alfred Thayer Mahanian argument about what's going on strategically. I looked at your graphics and it just jumps out at you that, here it is. Hey, we're going to do these coastal ports. We're going to do railways. This is just, it's coaling stations all over the place. So the takeaway for me, of course, is that it doesn't look like it has a direct US security play, but the Chinese in their statecraft across a wide spectrum of elements absolutely understand that geography matters, right? That's the hidden message in your presentation to me is, hey, Thomas, this doesn't, when you look at just the straight stick trade data or economic data, does this really have a security play? But then you start to look at locations, and this starts to look like La Jolla real estate. It's just location, location, location. So I thought it was really well done. I think you took on too much, and the challenge was to focus it a little tighter. But really, really well done. Thanks.
Yes, sir. And to follow up on that, I think the geography, that was something I initially thought about, but because of things like the 7th Fleet being between these countries, being able to be between these countries and Chinese ports, that the implications aren't, they don't currently matter to us because as much. This is something I explored with Dr. Zhang, was that any of these naval passageways could easily be shut down by a U.S. embargo, and that China wouldn't have the ability to break it yet. And that's why the security implications of these dependencies, they aren't pressing because of our ability to be a hard barrier navally between these countries and China.
Don't give the U.S. Navy too much credit, especially the 7th Fleet.
Yeah, I was going to say they have a history of kind of questionable commanders, so watch out for those ones. All right, so open up the floor, of course, to some other questions. So it looks like David Sacco has a question. David, please shoot away with your question.
and I'll speak louder. I have a couple of different computers. Thanks very much, Lance. Good presentation. Do you think China's activities in Africa constitute sufficient out-of-area activities for them to truly be considered a global power, or just still a regional power with some reach? Over.
So it sounds like the question, if anyone have hard was difficulty hearing, was are China's activities enough for China to be considered a global power, or is it still more just a regional power?
I think that this is insufficient evidence to promote China to the prestige level of being a global power. I'll paraphrase Dr. Gartsky here on that these are just investments that show that they're poor financial investments in these countries with low credit rating, because historically these countries have defaulted on loans to other countries. I think it shows China has a lot of money, as Dr. Gartsky explained it in the last time I presented this, and they have to spend it somewhere. I don't believe that it's sufficient to show that they're a global power. They're not building permanent military bases here. I think they actually built their first overseas base in Djibouti. But a lot of this money is spent on local infrastructure, nothing that the Chinese government can use as. I don't think it really bolsters their power in these regions, their military power, their ability to project power from these places. So I don't believe that it promotes them to that level of prestige yet. Thank you, Dr. Sacco.
I think it's a terribly useful thing, and you've done very well to convince us that these are not core interests for the United States. But a different kind of question is to ask, if they are so important to China, and your presentation gives prima facie evidence that they are, because these are clearly not purely financial investments. If they were, they'd be run through private sector banks, and the Chinese government wouldn't have to play a big role in this, except possibly a little coordination and, pats on the back all around. So China wants this. Any investment is a security liability. When you build something, it becomes a potential target. So maybe flipping this on its head and asking the question, not how does this hurt the United States, but how can this hurt China? And then the question would be, does it make more sense to be a spoiler in this process now, or to let it happen and, like you said, create those liabilities that allow entities like the Seventh Fleet to interdict maritime operations in the future? What's the main play here in terms of a more sort of assertive strategy for U.S. interests?
My opinion on that would be, we're seeing a little bit of the bleeding right now, that these countries weren't set up to be financial superstars. They can't pay back their loans in this trying environment economically, and China doesn't. The era of gunboat diplomacy is over, and China has no way of recouping their investments. They've spent hundreds of billions on the continent, and I don't think they have anything to show for it. And if they do, they weather the storm, they get these projects built, and the countries get their payment schedules back on track. Like you said, that's another liability down the road. They have to guarantee their trade routes are secure to even benefit from bolstering these economies' ability to buy from China, if that's what their mission is in the first place.
So we have another question in the chat box, which I will kind of read and sum up. So from Damon, basically the question is, if really this whole thing is about resource extraction, then, is it then tied to China's high rates of economic growth, which of course means becoming more and more powerful? And then wouldn't that be a core strategic concern of the US, especially after COVID? So all that's to say, it sounds like we don't think it's a core national interest, but Damon's saying, well, in one sense, maybe it is, if it's related to increasing Chinese economic power. How do you respond?
I mean, it's hard to say how much this is, predict how much this is going to affect Chinese power, and I guess I'm not completely clear on what the question here is. Are you asking if this is tied to Chinese growth, should we be fearful of this growth, Dr.
I think
or Dr. Coletta?
Oh, I guess they can.
Oh, you can go ahead, Patrick.
The way yeah, go for it.
I think you guys had my question right. If it's tied to the high economic growth, that's a long-term core strategic concern of the United States. That's from Destined for War, the Thucydides trap from Graham Allison, which I think is delves into economic statecraft. So your argument, Lance, I'm trying to press you. Your argument is that the heat map shows blue or nothing close to where the bases are. So in the short term, you don't have a sharp strategic concern. And so I'm trying to press you by saying, okay, let's think on a different time scale. If this is about, again, Admiral Thomas talking about the geography and Mahan and the British Empire, if this is about resource extraction, then it should be tied to long-term economic growth. And that has been a concern. And if you add the COVID shakeup, where the recovery pattern may matter, so if China manages to recover faster than the US economy, you may see China buy a little extra time. I mean, the concern was that this long trend of growth was about to peter out, and that this was the time to press China on trade. But then the pandemic comes, and now they've got this investment in what looks like resource extraction rather than direct political influence. But yeah, if it's tied to economic growth, but it sounds like you're saying that it's not a very good investment, and that blocks my question a little bit. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's that bad of an investment. Like, there's no way that this could work out for them through resource extraction in the future, but I'll let you handle that one.
Certainly. Evidence of early signs that it's not the best investment for growth. Some of these countries are trying to renegotiate the terms of the deals to maybe even just give these loans forgiven, and so the loans themselves aren't a good investment for interest, but whether or not these loans are serving the purpose of building economies for long-term resource extraction, I'm not certain. I saw Tanzania is already backing out of loans of already verbally agreed upon deals to build a port. They have $4 billion, $3.7 billion in debt to China currently, but future debt was being. It had a new domestic leadership to reneged on some of these deals to build these big infrastructure deals. So it's hard to say how they're going to be able to recoup their money, either in terms of resource extraction or just interest on these loans, when a large majority of these loans end up being forgiven in the short and midterm after they're agreed upon. Very few of these loans reach maturity historically over the last 2 decades.
You're probably right, Lance, but I'm not entirely convinced, just because of the U.S. pattern in Latin America. Those countries were not paying their loans back either, and it resulted in the U.S. controlling the channels of resource extraction from that part of the world that was the so-called backyard, or the Caribbean being an American lake. Part of the reason for that was that those countries weren't paying back their debt.
Yeah, and I'm not certain that China will be able to leverage an inability to pay debt to own these means to resource extraction, these railways and ports. We saw in Sri Lanka was an example of this happening, where China was able to shift ownership of a Sri Lankan port from the Sri Lankan government to a private Chinese business, which, as Dr. Gartsky reminded me, basically shifts the power to the Chinese government through more or less means. So it's possible that they could be able to, this could create the capability for them to force extraction, which would raise this on the totem pole of U.S. security interests. If they begin forcibly recouping their investments, then I think that we would have a security interest. But I think as of now, I don't think that we do. So I'm not sure if that fully covers all the bases that you touched there.
So good, obviously interesting project, good questions, some good answers. I wish we could continue further with all of these, but we're unfortunately out of time for today. I just wanted to thank everyone for tuning in. Specifically, thanks to Admiral Thomas for you taking the time to be with us here today and give some feedback.